Okay, good afternoon everybody. You're very welcome to this afternoon's webinar. My name is Andy, more on that in a second, but just to say that this is one of a series of webinars that we're running on people management and the role of leadership in engineering in particular. More on today's session specifically in a second, but first I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Andy, as I said, Andy Webber. I'm a principal consultant with the institution. My role is to deliver leadership workshops and other things, other topics as well, but primarily leadership workshops to mainly engineering clients all over the world. In the past, I've also had quite a bit of experience delivering in different sectors aside from engineering, so I'm hoping that today I will be able to share some of my understanding and thoughts on leadership with you. With me today we have a guest speaker. His name is Steve Pepperell. Steve, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Hi Andy, hi everybody. Yeah, my name's Steve Pepperell, and I work with Andy sometimes as a trainer, and my specialism really is all things commercial, sales, marketing, negotiation. I was sales director at Nestle for about 5 years, and in my team I had 250 people, so as you can imagine, leading a team of 250 people, you get lots of experience in both managing and leading, so that's why I've joined today's session.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much indeed. So just to give you a little bit of a range here, we are planning for the session to last around 1 hour. Somewhat depending on the number of questions we get toward the end. A bit more specifics on what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to begin the session by just broaching the subject of leadership in general, having a little bit of a discussion with you, I hope, where you will participate by writing your thoughts in the sort of chat box on what leadership is, and then exploring leadership and management and the differences and similarities between those two. Towards the end of that discussion, Steve's going to take over, contribute his thoughts on that, and then going to talk about the role of the follower in leadership, and wrap up by exploring a little bit the action-centered leadership theory, which he will outline to you a little bit more later. So, for the moment, I would like to kick off by just asking you the question. That's a very, very broad question, but just instinctively, or what are your gut feelings, what are your thoughts? What is leadership? Okay, Joe wins. First of 119, Joe, that's a significant achievement. Driving a team effectively towards a common goal. Yes, just a reminder from my my back office team to make sure that when you're typing, you select all attendees in the send to box so that everybody can see your comments and not just me. So obviously I'm not going to be able to read all of your comments, but I would like to pick up on some themes. Getting people to listen, it's providing vision and inspiration, is a word I've seen several times. We have inspiring teams of people. Teams seem to be a common theme, and achieving a common goal, providing direction for the team, understanding your team members and knowing how to play to the strengths of your team members, visualizing what is possible and impossible. Good. So leadership involves direction. It involves some kind of journey, that involves taking people with you on that journey. And one of the things I want to investigate today, really, or emphasize, really, is the fact that what leadership in organizations is a little bit different. When we get a badge saying manager or leader on it, and we have a team of people reporting to us, we take on a leadership role. Now, that's not to say that we haven't played a leadership role prior to that, because leadership isn't necessarily always a position. It's a role that we can take in any team, even as a team member. Nonetheless, if you look back and think about leadership in a sort of wider perspective, if we think, for example, if I think about great leaders, Steve's going to ask you this question a little bit later on, but if I think about a great leader, someone who I really admire as a leader, one of the first people that always springs to my mind is Gandhi. And Gandhi was a leader, somewhat of a reluctant leader, actually, initially. He began by going off and doing his thing. And it wasn't quite as simple as this, but essentially he was doing his thing, and when he looked round, there were a bunch of people following him. And his initial instinct was to say, no, go away, leave me alone, I'm doing my thing, you go and do yours. And they refused to. They wanted to follow. And that is what makes a leader. That is what leadership is, essentially. A leader is somebody who has followers. It's as simple as that. And so you could argue that the moment you get a management or leadership role in an organization, you become a leader. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that. And in fact, if anything, organizations can make us a little bit lazy, because people like Gandhi, once he decided to take on the leadership role, had to inspire his leaders to follow him. If the moment they stopped wanting to follow him, he stopped being a leader, or would have done if they had stopped. In an organization, people don't really have that choice. They're paid to be in our team and report to us, and therefore we don't have the same requirement to inspire people to follow us. But actually what makes a good leader in any set of circumstances is one that chooses to inspire people to follow, whether they have to or not. So leadership, in summary, to me, is, in essence, a leader is somebody that has followers, but good leaders are ones that inspire their teams to follow them and inspire their followers to follow them. Just a summary a little bit of some of the characteristics or qualities of good leaders that you can see, and again, bring to mind people that you admire as leaders, and you will see these qualities within them. They're a combination of things. They're a combination of toughness, the preparedness to make difficult decisions, but at the same time, warmth and humility, and the ability to inspire confidence, both in them as leaders, but also to inspire people to feel confident in themselves. So it's a combination of different qualities and characteristics that makes a leader a good leader. So I want to ask a secondary question, and we've got a poll for this purpose. So I'd just like to bring that up and ask you to respond, if you would, by choosing an option in the poll. Simple yes/no question. Is there a difference between management and leadership? And you have 10 seconds remaining to give your answer, and we'll see what the results are. Okay. Rach, can you display the results? There we go. So 30 of you didn't manage to answer. One of you thinks no, 91 think yes. That's an overwhelming majority for yes. So there is a difference between leadership and management. I tend to agree, although it's a little bit of an academic difference, in my opinion. So back to the chat box. What is the difference between management and leadership? Those of you that think there is a difference. Any thoughts? Okay, let's have a look. Leadership has followers, but management may not necessarily have followers. Okay. Telling people what to do versus inspiring. Not all managers are leaders, sadly. I agree with that. Manager enforces, at least not good ones. Manager enforces, leader inspires. Yeah. There's a lot of inspiration with leadership, and managers more sort of telling or controlling or instructing. Leaders seem to have visions. Managers turn that vision into reality. Leadership is giving courage. Management controls. Managers set targets and monitor progress. Leadership is venturing to new things. Interesting ideas. So which one is better? Leadership or management? Which should we pick? Both? Leadership? Both? Both necessary? Need both? Scenario and the individual? Combination? Both have their place? Okay. Seems to be probably a majority for both. And I would say that actually if we look at what managers do and what leaders do, that actually to be effective in an organization in a role which requires either management or leadership, we tend to need the other one. To be really effective, a leader needs to have management qualities, or conversely, if you prefer it, a manager needs to have leadership qualities. And it refers back a little bit to what I was saying earlier on about the fact that organizations can make us lazy. Once we get a badge, particularly saying manager, we know that our teams have to follow us, they're paid to follow us, so we don't put necessarily the same effort into inspiring them to follow us as we would if we were in a situation where there was a free choice about whether they had to follow us. So I quite like this idea of managers herd. I can almost imagine them. For some reason I see ducks in this mental image, and manager running behind trying to gather together all these ducks and push them in a particular direction, whereas leader is much more likely to be striding out ahead with people following. I'm not going to read all of these out. Do the right things. So leaders do the right things and managers do things right. That's a sound bite from a guy called Stephen Covey, for those of you that know him. It's about leaders picking the direction, managers making sure that we get it right once we've picked the direction. And if you think about that, just that line in that table, it's not enough to pick a direction. We actually have to break it down and work out how to get there. So management is about execution to some extent, whereas leadership is more about deciding where we're going. The risk-taking and minimize risk-averse is the last one I want to pick. So leadership involves taking risk. It involves inspiring and pushing the boundaries. And managers then perhaps sit back and assess the risk in a more risk-averse kind of a way, which the balance of which hopefully gives us the right overall response to, or to risky situations. We need to take risks clearly, but equally we need to manage risks. So I like to think of this really as any leader or any manager, whatever you call yourself, it's really two sides of the same coin. You can't be effective without having qualities from both sets of behaviors. And really what makes us effective in an organization is the ability to combine those two sets of qualities as an individual who has responsibility for others, let's put it that way. I had a group once that decided that we weren't going to call people managers and leaders anymore, rather lanagers or meaders. I think we settled on lanagers in the end, just to emphasize the point that actually it doesn't matter what level you're at in the organization. If you have people that are following you, you need both sets of qualities. And these are some of the things that perhaps good managers do that are more management tasks rather than leadership. So just picking out the last comment in the chat box, and actually I've just seen another one I want to pick up on as well, that the managers can lead us down the wrong route, and that's right, because managers are about execution and they're not looking necessarily for where we're going. Leaders are the ones that provide that direction. In fact, the root of the words I find interesting. Leader comes from an Anglo-Saxon root of a word that meant the road or path ahead. And so there's very much a sense of going somewhere in the word leadership. Management, conversely, comes from the Latin word manus, for the word for hand, and is more associated with a hand turning the handle of a machine. So it's operating something efficiently. Just as another aside, Steve mentioned in an orchestra a manager as a conductor and leader as a composer. It's an interesting analogy. Yes, the composer sets the direction and the manager controls the execution of that direction, or the music in this case. There's a very interesting TED talk from somebody who I will check while Steve is talking and write you in the chat box if you're interested, about this guy is comparing different conductor styles and looking at the conductor as the leader of the orchestra on the day. But I quite like your metaphor, Steve. I think that works too. So I think it's about time I hand it over to Steve and let him contribute some of his thoughts to this discussion. Thanks for your attention so far, and I will be back on later. Steve, over to you.
Thanks very much. I'd like to take this a stage further. I want you to imagine the circus act with the guy with the spinning plates, and he's got about a dozen or 15 of these spinning plates, and he carefully makes sure that every plate remains spinning. If you could imagine in a management or leadership sense, every one of those plates are a job or a task that you need to do. It may be you need to do coaching, or you need, or there might be some management work that you need to do, say checking into people's expenses. All of those jobs are represented by one of those plates. And the point about leading and managing people is you can let one or two of those plates wobble because you're focused on another part of the job, which is deemed as more important in that particular situation, but you can never let them fall or break. So your job as a leader and a manager is to look across all of those different tasks and all of those different things that you have to do, and make sure that they're all moving along. Some better than others, because you can't have everything going all at the same time. But obviously they've all got to be moving together. So what I'd like you to do now is just in the chat box, I'd like you to describe behaviours of managers that you've worked with in the past, and just think about either good managers or bad managers, but managers that you've worked with in the past. What have you seen? Good. So there's some managers can be over-controlling, obnoxious. Some have given proactive suggestions. Some have been motivating. Good. Some have been approachable. Some have been dominant. some have been ignorant of what the process actually involves. That's absolutely right. You have a what you've described here is a selection of good managers and bad manager traits. And for me, really emphasising what Andy said earlier, if you think of a manager as if you think of a leader as somebody who sets the direction, often with really great leaders, they will decide which direction we need to go. John F. Kennedy would be a good example. We're going to have a look at a picture of him later, but John F. Kennedy recognised in the early 1960s that he was taken over from an old general who had been a general in the Second World War, and he was and there was a lot of unrest in America at the time, and he needed something to inspire the nations, for everybody to get inspired and work together. And that's why he said, we're going to put a man on the moon. So that was his, if you like, his vision. Okay. Now, he had no idea about the how. He knew what the what was, but he had no idea about the how. And so he's a great leader because he came up with the vision and knew why he wanted to do it, why he wanted to put a man on the moon. But it was the managers who actually broke that task down into bite-sized chunks that they could then that could then be done in order to make it possible to put a man on the moon. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is just have a think about some of the poor behaviours that you've seen in managers. And first of all, I'd like you to think about the consequences of somebody being a poor or untrustworthy or unprofessional manager or leader. And I want you to think about the consequences on the people that are managed poorly. So the person that's actually receiving the wrath of a poor manager. So just put in the text box what you think might be the consequences on that person. Okay, they don't resentment. Yeah, that's right. Good. Low motivation and job satisfaction, yeah. Poor development, yes. Yeah. Stress, depression, yeah. Most people leave their bosses, not their jobs. That's absolutely right. People do leave bosses, not companies. Demotivated, demoralised, absolutely right. Now, what I'd like you to do now is think about the other people in the team that witnessed that bad behaviour by that manager. What do you think they feel? What do you think they feel when they see that manager managing that guy poorly? Can you put your thoughts in the chat box, please? No respect for them, yeah. They will fear becoming the next target, so a total lack of trust. They can work just to company rules, yeah. They start to become disengaged. They get empathy with the guy that's being treated poorly. Absolutely right. Team spirit breaks down. Very good. Yeah. So when you're a poor manager and you're behaving badly as a manager, you don't just affect the person that you're dealing with poorly. The rest of the team starts to ignore the manager because they lack trust. Now, what I'd like you to do now is think about what would happen if you were the manager that was behaving poorly. I'd like you to think about what you think would happen about your personal reputation. And if you could put your thoughts then in the chat box, please. What do you think would happen to your personal reputation if you was that manager? It would become career limiting, yeah. People would lose trust. You'd be ruined. Well, not sure about ruined, but certainly one of the things that would happen is that you would find it much more difficult to get people to join your team, because if they think they're going to be bullied, or the manager's not going to be respectful to you, other people won't want to come and work for you. So you'd lose your followers, absolutely right. And finally, what would happen to what would be your future as a result of this? What do you think would happen? Very limited, yes. Anybody got any other thoughts? Yeah, you could become ostracised, absolutely, and your opportunities would be limited. You probably have poor career development. You may be put out onto another part of the company, that's true. You would be part of a failed culture, certainly, and as the manager responsible, you would be blamed for being part of that failed culture. So lots and lots of thoughts there. So why do we end up managing poorly? Because believe me, we all do it. It may be because we don't have enough time to spend on somebody, or we're under pressure, or things like that. And the point here is that we're only human beings, and you can occasionally manage people poorly and get away with it. But if it becomes the way you think, the way you manage all of the time, then it becomes really, really difficult. And Andy said, you know, you can't be a leader or a manager without followers. And the first thing I'd like to say is that leadership is situational. You don't have to necessarily be the most important person or the boss in any business to be the leader. If you were a board meeting, the chairman of the board would be leading the meeting, absolutely, but when they talked about the sales plan, they would the chairman would hand over the reins of the meeting for that moment in time to the sales director. And similarly, when they went on to talk about marketing, it would be handed over to the marketing director. So I think this idea of the chairman being a leader being the conductor of the orchestra is absolutely right, because what the chairman is doing in this particular example is he's handing the role of leadership over to the sales director, then over to the marketing director, then over to the finance director, because he recognises that they are the experts in that particular discipline. And another example where leadership is situational, I'd like you to imagine that you're at a conference and you're up and you're the guy in charge of that conference, and you're speaking to a group of 100 people, and it's about 15 minutes before lunch, and all of a sudden the doors burst open and in rushes a fireman, and he says, there's a Second World War II bomb that's been found in the car park. Everybody needs to leave the building immediately. What do you think would happen if you as the leader said, well, it's been there for 50 years and hasn't blown up. Another 15 minutes won't make a difference. So why don't you all stay? We'll finish the program and then go off to lunch. So, and as you can see, obviously people would think, well, I'm not going to listen to that leader. I'm going to listen to the fireman. So he then goes off to, so then everybody would then follow the fireman. So you can see that leadership is situational, and it's not hierarchical, because clearly the fireman doesn't have he doesn't have the reportees, but as soon as the situation occurs, whereby we've got to follow somebody else, we make that choice. And it's the followers who always choose who they are prepared to be led by. It's never the other way round. And that's why it's really, really important to work on your followers. You need to inspire your followers. You need to treat your followers with integrity and fairness, but that doesn't mean you have to be soft on them. You can be tough on them as long as you're fair. And you need to be willing to show warmth and humility, as Andy said earlier. Now, the thing about followers is this: is that because they choose who they are prepared to be led by, it is actually possible, even though you're given you've been appointed as the manager of a particular team, if they think that there's somebody else in their team that's making more sense and is more inspiring, the people in the team may well choose to follow that person. So somebody's just asked the question, and the question is: would leadership not still require some level of hierarchical authority to make significant impacts on the business? I don't think it would. I don't think it is actually necessary to have a hierarchical authority, as long as because if you need to convince people with your credibility, and you need to get people's both the logic and the emotional side to keep people on your side. So you don't necessarily have to have the stripes. You don't necessarily have to have this hierarchical authority. Now, there's a really, really good book that you can pick up by a guy called Rob Goffey, who's leads the business side at the London Business School, and the book's called Why Should Anybody Be Led by You? And that's a question you should ask yourself every day when you're leading a team. Well, why should they lead? Why should they be led by me? What am I doing right that makes people follow me? Because again, I think Andy's comments about Gandhi are absolutely right. People follow many leaders, not because they're told to, but because they believe in what that person says, and that's why you need to work on your followers. You have to remember that you can be a leader and a manager, or you can be appointed a leader or a manager, but if nobody's willing to follow you, you're just a guy all on his own. You only become a leader or a manager when people are willing to follow you. So what I'd like you to do now is think of a leader you admire, and what it is about them that you admire the most. Could you put that into your chat box, please? There's some great examples coming in here. Authenticity is a good one. It's interesting that somebody mentioned listening gives the impression that they're listening. I've met two people that one person had spent time with President Clinton, and another one had spent time with Nelson Mandela. And when I asked them both what they had experienced when they met them, these people, they both said exactly the same thing. For that 2, 3, 5 minutes that I was talking to Clinton or talking to Nelson Mandela, they both made me feel as if I was the only person in the room while I was talking to them. And having that ability to show that you really are listening to people is a great skill to have. But there are lots and lots of good thoughts coming through here. people talking about the choice of words in a difficult situation. Somebody's mentioned Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. Others have talked about put the team before the approval from seniors. That's very true as well. And other names have been mentioned also. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just move on to the next slide. Now this is a piece of business theory that's been developed by a guy called John Adair. And what he says is that, as I mentioned earlier, that leadership is situational. He recognised that. But when leading anybody, you have three things to consider. The first is the task's needs. So, defining what the task is, setting out the goals and objectives, allocating the work, designating the resources, and measuring performance. But most importantly, adjusting the plan to the circumstances that you're dealing with. And then the second one is the individual needs. In other words, the needs of each individual in the team. So have they got a job description? Are you properly recognising their individual abilities? Are you helping to motivate those individuals? And are you also developing the individuals to do better than they previously could? And are you willing to attend and listen to their personal problems? And the final task is the team needs. So that's about making sure the team works as a cohesive group. So you need to set standards, maintain discipline. You need to build the team spirit. You need to make sure the team has a sense of purpose and knows which direction they're going. You need to appoint sub-leaders, much like the example I gave you earlier in the boardroom. The sub-leaders have been chosen by the chairman, one to look after sales, one to look after marketing, one to look after finance. And you also need to ensure that there's effective communication up and down within the group, so that the team feel that they can tell you what they can give you feedback, and the team feel they can give each other feedback, and the team feel happy when you give them feedback as well. So your responsibility is to train the group as well, to get the group working both independently and interdependently. So here are a few great leaders, and I'd like to just pick out a couple of them. The first one is that I'm going to pick out. Somebody's already mentioned Abe Lincoln. Is the lady third from the top. Now that lady is a lady called Hedy Lamarr. Now Hedy Lamarr was born in 1913, and you may have seen recall her as a sexy movie star of the 30s and 40s if you're old enough. But few know that she was actually an engineer, and she invented a remote-controlled communication system for the US military during World War II. Now, Lamarr's frequency hopping theory now serves as a basis for modern communication technology, such as Bluetooth and Wi-Fi network connections. Another one I'd like to talk about is the way Nelson Mandela decided the best way to bring the country together after he was announced as president was to try and get the South African team to win the Rugby World Cup. He recognised that sport was a means in which he could unite the country. So that's why he decided that he was going to put all of his efforts in making sure that the South African rugby team at the time had all the resources they needed to win the World Cup. Another guy next to Nelson Mandela, that fellow's called Ernest Shackleton. Now Ernest Shackleton was a bit of a dreamer really. He was an explorer, and he'd made a couple of attempts to get to the Arctic, and wasn't able to do it, and then tried to get to the Antarctic, and he got shipwrecked, and he had to leave all of his men on an island, and had a horrendous journey of that took about 90 days to get to safety in the Falklands, he still managed to go back after a year or so to go and rescue all of his men. All of his men knew that he would come back for them, and he didn't lose a single man, despite the terrible conditions that they had. Jay-Z's another interesting leader. If you think of where he came from the mean streets of New York, and yes, he recognised that hip hop could actually unite people. So it was very interesting when you see the way he's moved his business from music into lots and lots of other areas of entertainment now, and he inspires a generation because of the way he's thinking. There's a guy called Stormzy who's quite new, and he obviously already has this same vision of being able to unite people through music. And the final person I'd like to talk about is Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill, if you read about his life, he made lots and lots and lots of mistakes through his life. He moved from parties. He made some terrible errors early in his career. But the point is, when it mattered most, at the start of the Second World War, he had what it takes to lead the country through its most difficult times. And sometimes you have to make mistakes to be a great leader. And you learn more from your mistakes than you ever did from your successes. So don't ever be afraid to make mistakes. So, what I'd say about leadership is that in choosing that vision, really great leaders are very rarely realistic, not by other people's standards. So the example I gave earlier with regard to the putting the man on the moon with JFK, and also Gandhi believing he could gain autonomy for India without violently opposing Great Britain. Also, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela similarly had these at the time unrealistic objectives, and what they do is they make those unrealistic objectives really start to come through. And somebody's just said that we can also learn from other people's mistakes. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And one thing I would say to you is that I worked for 6 years for a guy who I've often described as the worst manager I've ever had the privilege to work with. Yeah, I probably learnt more from him than I did from any other manager I worked with, simply because I would watch what he'd do, and I would say to myself, I'm not going to do it that way, or I'm not going to let other people, I'm never going to make people feel like that. So, I think that's just about me finished, and I'm going to hand back to Andy in a moment. But what you must understand is that every role in business requires both leadership and management behaviours. It's never 50-50, or rarely 50-50. You take Theresa May, her decision to change the proposal to increase national insurance contributions for the self-employed and make Philip Hammond reverse that proposal was both a leadership and a management decision. She very definitely decided, I need to manage this situation, but she's shown tremendous leadership by doing that, and now everybody knows who's in charge of that party. And there are lots and lots of examples like that. But the real skill is in assessing the situation and applying the right behaviours. So I'm now going to pass over to Andy. Andy, it's over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. So thank you very much indeed, Steve, for your thoughts and ideas. Anybody got any questions that they would like to ask? If you have, type them into the chat box whilst I'm just talking for a second. I wanted to pick up on a question that was asked earlier on and also draw your attention. I did pop into the chat box a minute ago the TED Talk that I referred to briefly by Itai Talgam about conductors and leadership. Interesting perspective on it, and quite a nice thing to look at, to watch, purely for the interest in the musical side. Just while I'm here though, this is the question, I've just copied and pasted it. Somebody asked about hierarchical authority and significant impact on business, and I think I relate to the feeling behind the question, or the suggestion. Really, it's a bit more, this bit of a leading question or suggestion, and that and I agree to a point. It certainly helps. It's certainly easier if we're senior in the organisation. Then we have more immediate control or impact over things like strategy, direction, vision of where we're going as an organisation. Another way to think about that, though, is first that as a leader or manager, we have an impact or influence over the bit that we've been given responsibility for. And that's the bit that we are in control of, but that we shouldn't allow that to limit us, a little bit like Steve was just saying with Gandhi and JFK. Some of the greatest leaders dare to dream big, and don't allow what other people might see as normal limitations to stop them from doing even greater things than most of us feel are possible. So we can certainly have an influence in the organisation, a greater influence than perhaps we have been given responsibility for by working upwards. And actually that's what leadership is. It's not, I prefer to think of it as not a role that we're given, but a role that we take. And we take leadership in certain situations. Steve used the example of a meeting where people might be handed the baton, if you like, of leadership during the meeting, but we also can take that baton. Think about sports teams. There are official leaders in a sports team, captains and managers and coaches and so on, but at any one moment in a game, any one of the team members might stand up and take leadership for a particular situation. So thank you for typing in your questions. I am going to pick out, actually I'm just going to go first come, first served. So Syed asked, how do we judge that when to make intervention in a situation and show our leadership quality? Steve, do you have an opinion on that one?
Yeah, I think with that, once again, it's about three things. It's about the complexity of the task and the capability of the individual that's doing the task, and finally, that person's willingness to do the task. They're the three things that you really have to think about. So if the task is a complex task and somebody is doing it that's more than capable, I would leave it quite late to make an intervention. Whereas if that same task was being done by somebody that was not very experienced, I would be sitting down with them and saying to them, hey, I want you to come back to me every day as you get each of these steps in the process. So it massively depends on the individual that's working, on the complexity of the task and their willingness to perform.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I actually think the answer to your question, Syed, is in your question itself, and it's the word judge. It is a judgment, and that each situation is different, and we need to make a judgment based on the circumstances that we find ourselves in. But one of the crucial things to consider in that, I believe, I agree completely with Steve, is the level of experience / competence of the individual or individuals involved in the situation. It's about encouraging people to take responsibility, but not when they don't have the competence to do that. There's a theory, I don't think you've ever heard of something called level 5 leadership. I nearly mentioned it earlier on when we were looking at the qualities of leaders, when one of the qualities that we had on the slide was humility. Level 5 leadership is an idea that was developed by a guy called Jim Collins, wrote a book called From Good to Great. And in that book he describes what level 5 leadership is. There are obviously levels 1 to 4 preceding it. Level 5 leadership is like the pinnacle in his view. And the key to level 5 leadership are two characteristics that go together in a leader, which are relatively unusually in naturally occurring in people. And that is a determination and will, was the word that he used, to drive towards and achieve a goal, coupled with the humility to step back when the goal is achieved and give credit and recognition to the others around who contributed towards that goal, and take a back seat in the sort of the admiration that's received when something's achieved. To quote another famous leader, Sun Tzu, he didn't really write a book called The Art of War. It's a collection of his ideas. He's a Chinese general from several hundred years ago. His journals were found and collated into this book called The Art of War. And he said, the great leader is where the people say they did it themselves. Same sort of idea, where we drive towards success, and then when the success is achieved, we take a step back. Just picking up on one or two of the other questions, charisma is a word that's mentioned a couple of times. And is charisma important or essential in leadership? The problem that we have with that question is that most of us would not claim to be charismatic. I would disagree with all of us that say that, because I believe we all have charisma. Essentially, charisma is another word for personality, and we all have a personality. What makes up our personality is obviously very different from one person to another. And what we tend to mean when we say charisma is that engaging sort of magnetic personality. So the question then becomes, can we all have, I don't know, Nelson Mandela's charisma? Answer, no, we can't. Does that preclude us from being a leader? In my opinion, no, it doesn't. It might preclude us from leading a nation in the way that Nelson Mandela did, but it doesn't preclude us from being a good leader in an organization and doing the right thing by our employees and reports, or not just reports, anybody else within the organization whom we are leading. And it's about, to twist the question a little bit, or to answer it in the way that I believe it should be answered, good leaders are true to themselves. Doesn't mean we shouldn't learn from others and see another leader doing something and learn from that, but actually being true to yourself and using your own personality to its best effect is what I believe makes a good leader. I think if you try and be something you're not, or be someone that you're not, it somehow doesn't look consistent or believable to others. Okay, I'm sorry, we're really close to out of time. Let's just pick a quick answer to the presentation slides. Yes, they will be available to you. Steve, did you see a question that you wanted to pick out?
Yeah, the one there's two combined really. One's about asserting yourself in a large organisation, and what I'd say that that's again in the question really. Most important thing is to be well prepared and to demonstrate assertiveness. In other words, self-confidence in your own ability and your own ideas, and be able to articulate your thoughts and ideas well. And the last question that I can see here is, the consequences of poor management are often felt by the team and not by the manager. That is true, but in my experience, I used to think sometimes that poor managers seem to get away with things and just get moved to one side and outways and upwards. But I found in my long career that they all get found out eventually. So they do experience eventually the consequences of the poor management. So, and that's all really.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Right. Just to mention that if you would like a copy of the slides, then you just need to email the email address that you can see there in the chat box. And just to quickly wrap up, I want to mention upcoming training webinars that you can register for using the link on the slide on the screen. So you can see the one for May. It is about practical writing tips for engineers. If you follow the link, you will find further webinars in July, September and November on managing risk, on TRIZ, and safety management, risk and safety management. So please do take advantage of those free webinars by following the link on the screen. Also, to mention, there's some training programs that you can register and attend. Some might be with me, some might be with Steve or our colleagues. Again, you can see on the screen. If you need any details about that, then please do email the training email address at the bottom of that slide. Last, a management workshop called Essential Management Skills in the next week. If anybody wants to do a last-minute enrollment on that, then again, visit the website on the slide. Very good. So it just remains for me to thank Steve very much for his time, and even more important, thank you, Steve. Even more important, thank you all for your attention and importantly, your participation and contributions into the chat box. We like to make it as interactive as we can. Obviously, it's challenging with so many people attending. We found that's the best way. If anybody's got any feedback for us, then we would be very happy to receive that. But hoping to, inverted commas, see you all again online in one of the future webinars soon. Thanks very much indeed, everybody. Have a great weekend. Cheers, Steve. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.